Good evening. This is Cyber Power of Tigray Media. Today I have Dr. Quirk Ryan, who is a psychologist with expert of mental health, with multiple experiences in mental health. And as you everyone know, Tigray genocide is going on still, and I would like to talk about the mental health and the genocide, not only with Tigray people, but also the entire world. We're going to talk about the genocide and the mental health in Rwanda, in Armenia, in other countries. Not only the people who are facing the genocide, but also uh, the people were not they're not born yet during the genocide also. So please welcome Dr. Quirk Ryan for being with Cyberpower of Tigray Media.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. This is really an honor. Thank you for coming to me with this opportunity.
Great. Miki Tigray is also joining me, who works with Cyberpower of Tigray Media in English program. Miki, welcome.
Thank you, Ephraim. Sorry, guys, I'm a little late, but good to meet you, Dr. Quirk. Actually, I was watching your video before I joined you guys. I realized, wait a minute, they started. So I had to jump in because on schedule, and I saw 7, and then I saw 7:10. I was like, wait a minute, I got 10 more minutes. I was watching your video, incredible. Anyway, thank you for joining us. I look forward in discussing with you about the healthcare crisis. And I was listening to the part you were talking about the inmates coming back to society, the impact to our society, and that we will be able to tie that into the Tigray, war that we've been dealing with for the past 22 months, what it means to our communities across the United States and across the globe. So thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you again for having me.
Great. So my first question for you is, what are the key signs of stress and trauma individuals should watch before it's too late?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, because my understanding when you've presented this to me, Ephraim, is that I don't want to mischaracterize it, so please correct me. But basically what's going on now politically is a siege. And so there seems to be very little information, or difficult to get information from what's going on inside the region. And so what I think about when I hear that is that now, if we're not talking about a diagnosable disorder necessarily, but it still can be an event that would clearly have a conceivable impact on individuals. And I do want to note that there was an update in the manual for what psychologists use and mental health professionals use to diagnose disorders, or look for assess for certain symptoms. And one of those includes that the individuals do not have to experience the event itself. One of the areas now is that it could be an event including violence that could be impacting a family member. So I think it's important to mention that because that could be something that we discuss further as far as how those living outside the region may be able to start to take care of themselves and each other. Some of the signs, in my opinion, that you'd want to look for are changes in your mood. If you notice that your behaviors, like in the form of sleeping, if you notice that you're sleeping more or sleeping less, some of these symptoms described, not just post-traumatic stress disorder, but we could be talking about depression as well. And I hope that we have a chance to talk about, feeling powerless. And I do want to say that I am humbled by this topic, because it is profound. The word genocide is extremely serious, and I'm humbled because it is not something that I have experienced, myself. But like you said, we draw from other examples throughout history, and how we learn we learn from some of those past examples.
Great. I jump into the first question, but Mickey also will continue to ask you something. But let's talk about Tigray genocide. I heard you mention about Tigray genocide when I talked to you, and I was just wondering. There's a lot of people that they don't know what's going on. That Tigray is in a complete siege at this time, even though there is a lot of things we have done to make aware of the people of American and other communities that we are completely on siege, and we have a lot of mental disturbances. People who lives here as an Americans, myself, I'm an American myself, and I have not talked to my family for the last 3 years. No internet, no phone, nothing. Is no connection at all. So this is a big mental disturbances that we have. We are challenging. So can you tell us more about those genocide and mental health with other world, like in Armenian, in Rwanda, in other places? What's the impact of genocide on mental health?
Well, I can say too, if I can take a moment, that it was really you, Ephraim, that raised my awareness, I must admit. I don't know how typical my experience is for the average American, but I do view myself as somebody that tries to stay informed, not just on national news, but on international news. My sense, my opinion was that at around the same time, the conflict between the Ukraine and Russia, I think, started to grab headlines and started to perhaps take over some of the media cycles, and to the detriment of getting news out about about Tigray. And it was something that I had to look into deliberately to learn more. And it's another situation that, like I'm saying, from my own experience, I really do doubt that most Americans are aware that this is even happening.
Great. Let me give this opportunity for Mike if he has some question to ask you.
Thank you, Dr. Quirk again. So you specialize obviously in psychology, which is of the essence for the Tigrayan and the diaspora. Internally, this war, actually, to be more specific, it started the night of the United States election, November 3rd, morning of November 4th, 2020. So it's been almost coming up in a few more months. We hit in the 2-year mark, sadly. And what Ephraim was trying to express and explain is that many of us in the diaspora, this, for me, I feel like born twice, because this atrocity is happening again, because in 1984, as you remember, the Ethiopian famine, it was due to the lack of food and medicine access into the northern Tigray region. And back then, the Tigrayans suffer, of course. And so that atrocity, I was among the children who actually survived and made it to Sudan and came to the United States. So the trauma, at least within the diaspora, what we have noticed is that we have had people actually have committed suicide, which is unusual for Tigrayans, but also culturally, we tend to be very silent and not expressive of what's happening trauma-wise internally. And so especially the older generation tends to be more secretive, or likes to keep things to themselves, rather go through the pain and suffering. So for these kind of challenges, I'm just kind of curious on what guidance that you may be able to offer that might be more comforting and more door opening for our communities to hear what you have to offer, that's more supportive and guide them into an area where there is a tunnel, there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, great question. And I would also connect that to probably something that I didn't give enough information about, which was Ephraim's question about some of the signs and symptoms. I view these questions as related, and I can expand on that. And I'd also say thank you for sharing your own experiences. That's very powerful, and it's a reminder that there can be some generational trauma, which is a subject, like when Ephraim was mentioning what's been learned from some other genocide events. It's at this point that I would mention something that I think you were alluding to, which is that there can be stigma associated with mental health issues. It can there are sometimes cultural expectations to take on struggles yourself, to keep it private, uh, to have the expectation that you're going to carry it yourself and not share it with others. And I don't purport to know specifically what that would mean in your culture, as far as like some of the very specific root causes perhaps associated with not seeking help. But it is a common phenomenon for there to be stigma associated with having a mental illness, disclosing that you have a mental illness, and then seeking help. And so when I think of your question combined with Ephraim's, the caution is that there could be a point at which, you know, these delays in seeking out help or requesting help could have profound consequences. And I was not aware of the events of suicide that you mentioned, and I'd be interested in learning more about that, as far as what you believe to be some of the root causes associated with that. And you know, this is where I was mentioning that if you notice some of the differences in your own behavioral patterns, not just the sleep areas that I mentioned, but also if you individuals observe that they have a decreased interest in activities that they used to enjoy, social isolation, social withdrawal, you know, in other words, kind of shunting yourself off from some of your support systems and being overall less social. These would be some warning signs. And it's also not uncommon that in lieu of some mental health treatment, some of the substances that are out there that could change one's mood, but also have other consequences, would be substances, alcohol, things of that nature, that would be related to feelings of depression, associated with an experience of something being traumatic.
Great. So the next question that I'm going to ask you is a question from Professor Mulgeta, who is one of my mentor and who is the Informed Perspective program manager here in Cyber Power of Tigray Media, and he's also a professor in North Carolina. I hope someday we'll meet you, and then you two can discuss. He texted me to ask you, what coping mechanisms would you suggest for a community going through 2 years of trauma from not knowing about the whereabouts of their family member in Tigray?
Yeah, that question is very deep, and I don't think I've ever been asked anything like that in the past, because it gets right to the core of it, which is relationships to one's family, and the inability to be in contact with family. It's something I've only experienced temporarily and not on a scale that is being currently experienced with that region and individuals that live outside of that region. I can only imagine. And if placed in those shoes, or to draw on other examples, you know, this would be a theme that I could raise now, which would be, what are some ways of connecting in the communities that are available in your geographic area? It's obviously not the same as one's family, and I don't purport that to be the case. One of the other aspects on this subject would be, it would be expected that one may feel powerless in the face of this profound situation, and as was mentioned, that it's going approaching year 2. So this has been a long time on top of a global pandemic, which presents challenges of its own. And so, are there ways, like we were mentioning, my own knowledge of this conflict and of this genocide, are there ways that individuals can start to feel a sense of autonomy and power? It's my understanding that there could be efforts underway to raise local awareness of this problem, for example, which may have either the direct or indirect effect of one starting to feel like they're doing something when they otherwise they feel like they don't know what to do or can't do anything in the face of this situation.
Great. Mike, if you have any question, you can go ahead and continue.
Well, I want to go back. So I kind of want to touch base on what you mentioned, a few things where we have some of our viewers. I'm looking at the comments, and so one of our Tigran follower here is saying, "So sad. What's happening back home? We don't know what to do."
Yeah.
And I think you kind of touched on it. So part of the so far the people we've lost, some of them, of course, we'll never know because we don't know. There's no note. There's nothing, when they committed suicide. But one young man, for example, last year was that when he heard there was an actual all-out genocide by the Eritrean forces in some part of the Tigray area, he had his parents back there, and he was hopeless, and he just felt like it's not worth life for him to really be around while he will never be able to see his family. So that's at least what we believe, what caused him to take his own life. It's very, very, very uncommon, as you know, in the United States. We tend to see that, periodically, but for our community, for our culture, it is very, very rare circumstances where a person actually would commit suicide. But this situation, we're talking, somewhere in the number between 120 to 150,000 young women, girls, and sexually assaulted and raped, and nearly between 600,000, close to 800,000, if not more, civilians killed, targeted, just why we call it genocide. And then to mention 1.2 million, according to the Human Rights Watch, has been displaced in Western Tigray, and 2.8 million have been displaced internally within Tigray. And then to finish up, you have the entire region of Tigray completely under siege, meaning there's no electricity, there's no internet, there's no banking system, there's no way of any of us having the ability to help our family or to go see them what's happening. So that's the worst of it. So when you collectively put those together, you can kind of imagine and process it even yourself to just hear that, because genocide is a heavy word to use, but that really, when you have ethnic cleansing targeted by a government, a military, there is no other definition to call it other than what it is. So that's kind of what the background of it. I'm sure Ephraim has talked to you outside of the media too, but that's the deeper concern, and our family, our community outside the country are in a tremendous stress and suffering.
Yes, and there's official or related to some political, like there's formal attempts to try to provide food, as I understand it, and some of those efforts have been thwarted, unless I'm mistaken. I thought I had read recently that there was an operation to get some food into the region, and that was not permitted to come in. So it must even feel, if that's accurate, it must feel even more powerless. Like if that's an official organization, that's along the lines, I think it was UNICEF, unless I'm mistaken, that they weren't permitted entry, then what could I possibly do? When you break down, and I know this gets a little political, so forgive me, but when you break down the word genocide and you say it out loud, it has, another power as far as acknowledgement goes, because in my understanding of some of the historical markers on this, on genocide, there have been, including to this day, some reluctance by some individuals to use that term, either as far as, saying it out loud or acknowledging that, and that applies to some modern views on the Holocaust with Jewish individuals and others, during World War II, and it also applies to something like the Armenian genocide that has at different times had people not use that term, and then it's been powerful when somebody has acknowledged, a person of power has acknowledged that or used that term. So those are some of my thoughts, but it goes back to the idea of Well, can I actually turn the tables and ask a question for a second? Is it the case that the region has a steep history with Orthodox Christianity? Is that the case?
Well, so the Tigray region actually is predominantly Christian, but it's got a diversity of other religion, and it is the home of where, if I'm not mistaken, in the 614 or 612, this my history might be wrong, AD, when in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, when there's a Muslim execution, the Muslims fled and they were welcome in the Tigray region called the Aksum. And built the Al-Nagashi Mosque. Happens to be, I think, one of the oldest mosque in Africa. So it's really, of course, Christianity is strong in the Tigray region. 95 to 96% of the Tigray Tigrayans are Orthodox Christian, but I don't want to minimize the Muslim brothers and sisters that we have in our community that have lived for so many generations peacefully. So this ethnic tension, of course, is that we have, with all due respect, a group called an Amhara, who it's sort of like, I don't want to generalize the whole Amhara, but within the Amhara, you have the elite, you sort of call. They've always seek that they to be the only ones superior. The sort of like white supremacy. What we see in our culture, traditional in this country, is that you can't just say white people. Even in our justice system, we see what white supremacy does. We see when even certain extremists go to an extent. So the Ethiopian political arena has been that historically the Amhara elite has been rewriting the history of the Tigrayans from a religious perspective, from a war perspective. When it came to fighting, Tigrayans are known being the strongest, just tough fighters. But in the end, when it comes to governing, when to taking action, it has not been as strong as fighting on the battlefield. So that's been some of our internal even conflict within our own self, is that why do we always have to die for the name of Ethiopia, yet our people have shrunk? So in 1958, our population was shrunk under the regime at that time, Haile Selassie, and in 1984, we've lost over 1 million people, and of course there was a 17-year fighting that went on, and then they did a transitional government in 1991, and then in 1994 the Ethiopian constitution was installed, and we had the most peaceful country in the Horn of Africa, most respected, top 2 military in Africa, top 30 in the world militarily. Now it's flipped the other way around. You even have Al-Shabaab, enter into Ethiopia to fight because there's not a strong military. So right now it's the worst of the worst, because the ethnic division within the country is a mess. But Tigray is being the victim of the worst of the atrocity, because Eritrea, which is a neighboring country that became independent from Ethiopia, deploy massive troops. The Amhara group that I was talking about, their regional forces, and then there's a group called Fano, which is like a sort of like, I compare them with the white supremacists or the Nazi German. Obviously, they would actually have gone house to house and kill any Tigrayans they found, and some of them they would burn them. They'll tie them backward and they'll put them into fire. Just what you saw the Jordanian pilot when Al-Shabaab captured him. They put him in a cage, put gas on him, and burn him alive. We saw how shocking that was. That's happening now in the 21st century. Just in the last 6-7 months ago, we had people being burned alive, and the United States say they were disturbed by it, but no action has been taken.
Yeah, you have an impressive historical knowledge. I should explain that my question was born out of my desire of being respectful to you both and to your listeners, of trying to do some research on the history. And I saw that statistic about the 95 to 96, and I'll admit that I was trying to connect that perhaps misguidedly as a protective factor against that point you made about suicide. I wasn't sure if that was a protective factor, as far as sometimes what's found as far as individuals' reasons for living would be founded sometimes in their spiritual tradition. So that was my reach at a guess at a protective factor. But again, I apologize if it was misguided.
Yeah, no, no.
Good.
You are great, actually, Dr. Ryan. We're going to focus on humanitarian and mental health only. We're not going to go back to what's the cause of the genocide. That's not your expertise. That's not you
Sure.
don't want to talk about. And we're not going to ask you about the politics. Is totally. Uh, I'm not going to ask you about that. And Mike is also aware of that. My next question is, I don't know, for some reason is interrupting the internet, but when we talk about transgenerational impact, I'm just thinking about the people who are born right now. The pregnant woman was raped in Tigray with multiple the mental issues. When you say he sent me one email, and then I was reading about it, about the transgenerational impact of the genocide and the mental health. Can you tell me more about this?
Yeah, I mean,
And how can we cope? How can our people can cope with those kinds of
yeah,
mental
my
issues?
knee-jerk response to that is, the awareness of it can hopefully be beneficial to the current and future generations. I've probably overused the term profound at this point, but when I've read some of those studies that both focus on mental health, but then also on physical health. So when Mike was talking about the famine from 1984, that the lack of nutrition, to say the least, can be fatal, right? That's the obvious. But for the survivors, there could be both medical and mental health consequences to that. It could change conceivably one's relationship to food, as far as fostering a concern that having gone through that event and it being a very formative experience, it can be conceivable that a person would grow up believing that food was always going to be scarce. That's what I mean by sort of changing one's relationship to food. It could change your view on food, how much an individual consumes. Like I said, a future fear or anxiety regarding whether or not food is going to be available. It pales in comparison, and please know that. But the personal example that I have with that would be my own grandparents who grew up during the Depression in the United States. And by their report, they had very little money and very little money to spend on food. And when I saw them later in life, I still saw that some of those memories or that experience still shaped them, to the point that I could tell that they were showing their love through food and providing food and through cooking, and would also save and keep a lot of items, some of which individuals may not keep, because I think there was a fear that they would lose some of these possessions. And I do not that I had assessed them or I'm pathologizing it, but I did connect the dots and see a connection. The mental health consequences, again, it's a very different country, a very different situation, but within our lifetimes, there has been genocide in Rwanda and genocide in Darfur. And some of those consequences are still being learned. Some of those outcomes are still being seen. I think of some of the effects with also with child soldiers and some of the programs that have tried to face a very challenging situation of turning individuals who are trained to be soldiers into civilians. These are some of these are some of the impacts that can have, unfortunately, long-lasting effects that are born out of that experience or one's reaction to that experience. And that's why it's so important to seek help when you need it. I can't encourage your watchers enough that that these can have long-term consequences if not treated, and treatment is available. It certainly can be the case during the pandemic that admittedly mental health care can be hard to access. And I certainly realize that access is not always equitable, and there can be barriers and challenges to accessing services.
Oh, great. I think I don't know if there is some question that relates to this what you answer right now. W- what resources are there at the city, county, or state? Uh, what resources are there in? It could be in Washington State, could be in King County, could be our people are all over, and
Well,
people are suffering.
but
Uh,
Ephraim, let's give Dr. Quirk real quickly guidance, like I mean, idea, because last year, remember, the city of Linwood, the city of Seattle, actually did offer potentially free service for Tigrayans who are suffering from this. So we did have a Zoom meeting. I guess I want to add to Ephraim to just kind of give you heads up on that. But we have a community that's not, again, coming, for these kind of opportunities to utilize them. So I wanted you to add to that, like, what could we do to convince our communities to really be more forthcoming, but other communities like Seattle and Linwood, what could we do, to Ephraim's question, to really convince communities to be more welcoming and opening and willing to help the community who is suffering?
Yeah, because as an offshoot of what I was just talking about, and thank you for that example. I was not aware of that. That sounds like a very wonderful and important opportunity, and I'm really encouraged to hear that. I mean, I go back to that idea of what it sounds like is underway as far as the education effort or the raise awareness effort, because I do believe it to be the case that it is not well known. Um, and I'm even learning things during this conversation that I didn't know before. Uh, and it is unfortunately the case in the United States that access to healthcare generally and mental health care in particular can be very difficult to access. And as I mentioned, during the pandemic, there have been increases in requests for services, and there have been few staff to provide it. There has been the expansion of telehealth, and again, it could unfortunately be related to somebody's health insurance, or if they're able to pay out of pocket. But otherwise, it would be learning from that experience where there was the success in having services provided and seeing how that could be more widely available. It is admittedly not experience that I have, but I think it would stem from an acknowledgement of the extent of this issue and the impact it could have on those that are impacted by this genocide.
Okay. Thank you, Mike, for brought that to my attention, because last time when we had a meeting with the Linwood mayor,
Mm.
Nicola Smith, and with the Rec representative Larson, and with Senator Adam Smith, with the Mayor Control Office, we have had an opportunity to discuss about those. They told us if there is any Tigrayan Americans who are suffering, they have some places and opportunities for us to do the mental consultant and mental therapy, relaxation, and all that. They told us, to give them our issues and the data for them so they can help us. That's the reason why I'm asking you if there is any resources out there for people who are suffering before they commit suicide. Okay, Dr. Galadios, Professor Galadios, who also has a program with me, he asked me about post-traumatic distress. What is the post-traumatic after genocide? What you mentioned a lot of stuff earlier, but we need to know more about the post-traumatic distress or disorders. Well, I have seen people, our soldiers, American soldiers, when they came back from Iraq or Iran, and the post-traumatic stress is very serious. They have received a lot of attention and treatment. But when I think about the Tigray people, they have faced multiple, like Mickey said earlier, burning alive. When you see that, think what's going to happen on your mentally, and when people are like raped and got killed and all these kinds of stuff. So how can we cope with these kinds of our family and our friends are like very stressed out here. They even work here, they have mortgage, and they cannot talk their family, and all this, we need to have a little bit of more explanation from you how we can cope with these kinds of issues.
There's nothing easy about it. That's why I'm humbled by that question. I've not personally experienced anything like this, and that's the place where I'm coming from. But I take your question to heart. I'm also reminded of a question that I saw on my screen about somebody asking a very similar question, and sharing that this struggle is showing up for them day to day. As I interpret it, they had commented, I believe, about having these concerns every day, and it showing up at work. It The example you use of the soldier is probably the most widely known and well known uh, representation of PTSD, and but we know that situations like the one currently going on in Tigray can also represent an event that may lead individuals to exhibit symptoms of what's called post-traumatic stress disorder. And that again is why I'm beating the drum on trying to push up against the stigma of mental illness and the stigma of seeking help, because there's data to suggest that people often wait to try to access services. When it comes to PTSD in particular, like I mentioned, and just as a reminder, it does not just apply to individuals experiencing the event, which is to say, in this case, in the region specifically, but also may apply to family members and those that have that impact, knowing that their friends and loved ones are going through this situation. What's also known is that these types of situations, traumatic situations, do not always don't impact everyone the same way. So some of the symptoms I've described may be present, some may not. There was some research done on the Holocaust during World War II that we briefly touched on before, and it was done with some Holocaust survivors, and it was shown that specifically they were assessed for PTSD, and not all of the survivors evidence PTSD, and that is an event that was clearly traumatic, where people were being systematically killed because of their religion. So that is that is one of the data points that I'm aware of. And forgive me, Ephraim, was there another facet to the question? I mean, because I'm really, trying to bring it back to the here and now. Like when I see the comments go across the screen about somebody being impacted day to day, I think what it calls to mind would be that it would be certainly expected for somebody to be preoccupied with these, with thoughts about this. And what I mean by that is just thinking about it over and over to the point where it may get in the way of other activities like work, like play, like their home life. It would be very reasonable to expect that could happen. It would be so distressing, so concerning, so anxiety provoking, not getting the information, being worried about your friends and loved ones, that it would be, it could really impact your day-to-day life. That is absolutely what I would expect for these types of situations.
I personally, to be honest with you, we work together, and if I hear some kind of news before I go to work about like bad news, when my people are killed, or if there is a war, or some kind of news about rape, or some kind of news, no aid is going through to my people. And when I miss my brothers, my sisters, all these kinds of, I get irritable. I cannot pay
Yeah.
attention to my work. I get so I don't know how we can cope with this. That's why those my followers from Cyber Power of Tigray was like posting. Some of them, they lost their aunt because they had some diabetic and they couldn't able to get diabetic medications. There is no medication. There is no people who are hypertension. They have hypertension. There is no medication. When you are dehydrated, you cannot get any water, like clean water. There is no transportation. There is no gas. Gas is very expensive here, but there is no gas at all. There is no transportation at all, and all these kinds of and people with the money. My brother has money. He's a business owner, but his money in the bank, and the bank is shut down,
Mm.
and he's dying today now. With hunger. He doesn't have no money to buy something to eat. So this kind of thing, it makes me irritated, and other people are getting irritated. Those are the signs and symptoms how we can deal with this kind of stuff. How come people are not helping us? This is the question. But I know you are a very you have a lot of experiences, like behavioral change, mental illnesses, how we can cope with our work, how we can cope with friends, how we can cope with family. We need a lot of help from you. What we can do, how we can relax ourselves, how what we can do, like more on the intervention part, the therapy part.
Yes, and again, that is a significant question, and I think that if I were to get into the advice territory in the time that we have remaining tonight, it would be a focus on you had used the word feeling irritable. You used your very brave example of being impacted by something you hear, something you read on the way into work, and then noticing that impacts your mood. And so I would say, for starters, not to oversimplify a very complex and concerning issue. It would be along the lines of being aware of how this event is impacting you, how the genocide is impacting you, some specific ways that show up for you when in turn you show up for work, show up if you're a parent, show up in your home life, show up socially. Because those things, as far as awareness goes, awareness can start to give you power as far as acknowledging that these things are happening, and then what you're showing up to, like at work, for example, so that it doesn't, your threshold for stress, your threshold for frustration could then be lower because it's already up here. And then the risk is that somebody could end up reacting like all the way up here on a scale, like all the way towards 100 on a scale from 0 to 100, because you're showing up to work already, feeling with that irritability. What I found successful, and I have had experience working with individuals that have been either the perpetrators or victims of violence in other countries, including in Central America. I've talked to victims of natural weather events, which is obviously a very different phenomenon from a political genocide. But as far as individuals feeling powerless, what I found that they have reported as being helpful is that sometimes they schedule certain parts of the day to focus on the concern. They will schedule time, since otherwise it has permeated their entire days. Like, they can fulfill their whole days with worry and anxiety and frustration and anger. That some individuals have said, for this period of the day, I'm going to focus on it. I'm going to read the news. I'm going to think about this subject. And then for other periods of time, I'm just going to focus on work. And it takes practice. And I'm presenting it as if it's like common knowledge or easy. And that's not the case. But I've had others try this when they've had intrusive thoughts about past events, intrusive thoughts about violence that they experienced or observed. That's one thing that comes to mind.
Great, thank you. I'm going to give one chance for Mickey Tigray, and then after that, I'm going to talk about the TED
Only one?
talk.
So I've been reading the comment. Thank you, Dr. Quirk. I think a couple of the important, there's a lot of good comments there, but a couple of them I want to emphasize is you have culture and language barrier in the diaspora. So how do we cope with those? For instance, myself, like English, the language or the culture isn't an issue, but there are people like myself who may have that barrier and live in smaller cities. Because the reason I'm using it for myself is I live in a small town called Eugene, Oregon, and we don't have a community here. But there are others who actually have been here for a very limited time, and other communities across the United States and Europe that the language within the community they reside is very limited. So you have two factors here: culture and language barrier. Seattle, you guys are blessed because you got a large, minorities from all over the world, and you yourself are used to minorities from all over. So you understand the cultural barriers and whatnot. But we have communities like where I'm at, others who are not very diverse in, I wouldn't want to use the word not welcoming, but more like not understanding other culture and other language. And how do you close that gap? And how do you help those people who may not be as willing as to get the help that they need?
Cool. Between the two of you, these may be the hardest questions I've ever been asked in my professional life. And I appreciate that. And I want to say again, I really appreciate you inviting me here. I'm so grateful to be able to talk to you both and to hear some of these questions. I mean, you raised something that I wish I had provided in my previous answer, which is on that subject of what people can do. I mean, that part about community. And now I'm learning that there's some differences with culture, some differences in probably the size or availability of that community for a number of reasons. It is something that I would encourage. It's a reason why group therapy is a format that works for many people. So you can say, I have this experience and this person is talking about their experience. And it's like, I know what this person is feeling. I'm going through this too, so that you don't feel alone in a situation where you feel like you could be the one suffering because you're not in that area, and there may not be other Tigrayans in your area, and you could feel like I said, you're going through it alone. And then in that group format, you hear other people that are having similar experiences, and that could be in a very formal group therapy like mental health situation, or it can be a more informal gathering of people that have similar experiences. I admit that I don't know enough about your community to be able to expand on it in greater detail. In my previous response to access to mental health care, just like we're talking here on the World Wide Web, I've seen one of the silver linings to the pandemic has been the expansion of ways in which people can connect if they're not able to in person. So if you said in Eugene's a beautiful place, but if individuals are in a place where they can't physically be in the same space for one reason or another, then I would be persuaded that there could be virtual options that might perhaps be available.
Great. Cyber Power of Tigray Media. Dr. Quirk is a keynote speaker. Actually, there is a lot of speech from TED Talk. You can see his all the speech, and he's always likes to teach a workplace. Also, he teaches how to prevent suicide, how to cope with stress, how to do with a lot of things in his whole life. What he does is teaches and prevents suicide. So that's why I was so humble and asking, hey, Dr. Quirk, can you please say something for my people, the community of Tigray in Washington, Seattle, and other states. We have dealing with a lot of stress, and we have seen some of signs of suicide, and we don't know how to cope with this kind of genocide impact. So I'm so thankful, and thank you so much for giving me a positive answer and coming to my media and to discuss about this. And then most of them are very thankful for being here with us. Maybe I know you are so busy, you have a lot of things going on, but we have 5 minutes. I'm going to give that 5 minute chance for Mike if he has anything to say about you, and then we can let you go for for the night. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ephraim. Actually, Dr. Quirk, that is so your clip. Actually, Ephraim earlier texted to me, and so that was the second part of the clip that I was watching on your audience, their reactions and whatnot. So I do want to say also we appreciate you. I think the more experts in different areas are able to come out and share with our communities around the globe. As you know now, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, name it all, right? So when we share this, eventually people are becoming more and more appreciative that we have diverse people from all over the globe, that from a humanitarian perspective, without being sucked into politics, we can do things together that will hopefully help us to recoup our family and community. And I hope that the way we presented our discussion with you, or questions per se, um, they were not as like I got you moment, but more educational for all of us, because frankly, it's very tough. We sometimes, we have this deep pain that what we share with you, the words that we use, they're heavy for a lot of Americans. That when they hear the word genocide, that's not the word they really want to hear. They're just not exposed to it. But from the healthcare perspective, from your experts, we do really appreciate your ability and your willingness to really hear us and understand. And hopefully, moving forward, we'll try to squeeze a little more from your busy daily life and bring you on for 30 to 45 minutes and give a quick, this kind of like very highly important training and education to our communities that are desperately needing any direction, any guidance that may help them to relax or recoup. But last point or last question is, for those who you gave like some indicators earlier, obviously, but talk about changing food habits, loneliness, and all those things. In fact, actually, loneliness has been the biggest problems for our communities, that often people have to say it like when we go out to protest and stuff. Oh my gosh, I'm so relieved right now. I came out to yell and just like cry for my people, but I sometimes I miss work for a week or two because I can't even roll out of bed and to get food and water. So you have these kind of challenges with our community. So if you could take a few minutes just in general, these kind of there are different level of pain, different level of recoupment mechanism, we all know in the healthcare crisis, but these are just slowly painful process when you know that on the other side of the continent you have your own family that are like slowly but surely dying from the lack of food and medicine.
Yeah, and another profound question. I think the common thinking on this is that the encouragement to find an outlet. I mean, that example of protest can be very important for those that are comfortable and able to do it, because the thought about the outlet is the idea that if it doesn't come out in some of those ways, like where a person is able to voice their concerns, be with other people, it may end up coming out in other ways, and some of the risks involved if you're keeping it to yourself. And I think what you're doing is so wonderful, and I so appreciate even being asked to do this, because when I was first asked, I felt like this was an enormous responsibility, and I felt nearly overwhelmed by the task at hand, because as I was asked by Ephraim, my response was my fear that I would not be up to this task or not have something to offer when there is when there is genocide. And it would end up feeling like I was just offering a Band-Aid to a situation that obviously needs something more than that. So at the very least, I hope that there may have been one or two things that somebody may find helpful. I admire what you're doing, and I'm impressed by the resilience and bravery of your watchers and listeners. So thank you again for having me today.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I know we did not talk anything about politics, because when there is a genocide, there is a genociders who want us to say bad things about you, because you are just there is two sides. There is people are
Sure.
like So I just want you to be aware of that. We're not talking about anything about politics right now. We are just talking about the humanitarian and the mental status of the people who are the victims of mental status. So If something comes up to you as an offense or anything, I hope they're not going to do anything. But I just want to make sure that anything, anybody, everyone as a human being, we're supposed to be talk about humanitarian and mental health issues for anyone, not like political sides or anything. So thank you so much, and I do really appreciate for your time. Cyber Power of Tigray Media. I hope some other time we will have Dr. Ryan, Professor Mulgeta, and Professor Galadios and Miki Tigray as well. Uh, our
And
program will.
we are still getting comments saying that yes, we would like to hear. We would love to hear from Dr. Quirk in the future. So the comments are coming in. So people are appreciating you as well, or as a listener. So they're looking forward, hopefully, for more opportunities in the future. So we certainly appreciate on behalf of Tigray and the diaspora, but also soon this video will be broadcasted in the country when the crisis is over, and we are focused on what Ephraim say, the crisis, which is mental health crisis.
There will be a lot of work to be done there too, obviously, with all the reactions to this genocidal event. So that means a lot that I'd be asked back. I'm encouraged to hear that. And again, I'm here out of care and concern, and my heart goes out to you and all your watchers and listeners. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you.